matter, Mason? Was she such a dog you couldn't bring her to the party?
Welcome to week 42 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
This is episode number 203, and we've watched episode 203 of Santa Barbara. Originally aired Monday, May 13th, 1985. Oh, May the 20th is approaching. Nick knocks the gun out of the courier's hand and chases her upstairs to the roof, where they fight.
They fight all episode.
They fight for the whole episode.
Yeah.
Now, first, when they run into the stairwell, they're on the 8th floor, the newly discovered 8th floor of the 5-story hotel. And there's a stairs that go up that says to roof. And then later when we see them, they're past the normal stairs, and the courier's hiding behind a box, or Nick's hiding behind a box, whichever one got there first. And there's now an iron set of stairs that goes yet another flight up to, I'm guessing, the super roof. And then when they get to the top, there's one of those, you know how some roofs have this big, concrete wall that's like, I don't know, maybe the top of the elevator or something? So there's like really a whole story, again, where they could theoretically get up on top of that super duper roof. But it seems like they're about 9 stories up, I guess.
I'm kind of picturing the Capwell Hotel, and I don't think we ever see it, or at least we haven't seen it yet. But I'm kind of picturing it as being sort of layered, steeped, because that's the only way I can really figure it making sense.
Well, they've shown a building as an establishing shot for the Capwell Hotel before. That's usually when they showed Marcello in his office, though. So I'm not clear whether that's the same building or not.
Yeah, it could be one of those buildings that has had all kinds of little extensions and that put on it.
But it looks like a square 3-story building from the establishing shots that we've seen. So.
And it just seems so much more complicated.
Yeah, there's like more stairs, and then like Nick was hiding behind boxes, so that first roof number 1, it had like a bit of an area where people could hide boxes, and there was like buckets of paint again, like in the basement. And the super roof had the usual, ducts and vents and things, so that was normal. So anyway, that fight's going on throughout the whole episode upstairs. No one really hears it or notices it. They sure got that roof redone pretty good after the construction of the Orient Express, because it was just a roofless thing a few weeks ago. Jade lets drunk Mark drive her and the other 2 guys home, but eventually she gets scared of his drunk driving and just turns off the engine and gets out in the worst part of town and throws them the keys, and they just leave her there.
Yeah, really classy guys.
Yeah, so she's waiting for a bus, and a girl comes up named Christy. And she seems like she might be poor, possibly homeless. She's dressed kind of gypsy-ish, I want to say.
Yeah, I found her actually quite mysterious in her own way. She's in this really rotten part of town, but she doesn't seem to be particularly bothered by it. I mean, Jade is very bothered by it, but she's not. And I would say, yeah, she's got a little bit of a bohemian style happening, I would say. 80s style bohemian. And she says she's from Minnesota. So at first you think, well, maybe, she's come out here and doesn't really know the ways of the world. But then we find out a little more about her. And she seems a little more worldly than we may have expected.
So she and Jade hit it off right away, it seems. And she ends up recommending to Jade that they hitchhike home, because she doesn't think there's going to be a bus coming along at that time of day. So when they go to find a street where there's more traffic, and they're talking, and she talks about, how much attention she gets from guys, which is intriguing to Jade, because she's still trying to find that right guy, I guess. And she said, well, how do you let the guys know that you're interested? And Christy shows her the look that she gives them. Ted drives right past Lakin's house. They haven't talked at all since they got in the car. And eventually he just stops the car, says, I'm going to watch the Grunion running, and gets out and sits on the beach. So eventually she tires of sitting in the Jeep and waiting and just comes to the beach too, but she says, still, no talking, same rules. Eventually she says, are you even going to get me home before sunup? So Ted says that he just wants her to feel the same way as him. And she says that she does, but she just wants to get her life back together. So they get back in the Jeep and start driving. Now, I didn't think they had driven that far past the entrance to the Lockridge house, but somehow they drive past Jade and Christy.
Yeah.
So they pick them up, and at that point, when they ask where Christy wants to be dropped off, she reveals that she actually got kicked out of the bus station and has no place to sleep. So Jade invites her to stay at the Perkins house. Then Christy gives Ted the look.
Ted seems to like it, too.
Yeah, I mean, Lakin's, blown him off. So.
Yeah, the conversation between Ted and Lakin actually brought up a few of the things we talked about in the last episode, or the last time we saw them, which is that they were starting to maybe reconcile a bit. Ted brings that up. But then Lakin cites the conversation they had in the hospital, and that is indeed what seems to have put a bit of a chill on things again. So, yeah, it's back to being up and down with Lakin, but it looks like there is a new potential love interest, possibly, for Ted. Maybe a little more, in my view, I'm a little prudish about this, a little more appropriate one than Jackie, so it'll be really interesting to see how that dynamic plays out.
Because there doesn't seem to be anyone for Lakin.
She hasn't shown great taste in guys since her little breakup with Ted, I have to say. But it would be kind of neat if someone came along for her and we could get a really, really interesting dynamic going.
Maggie tells Cruz that she followed Marcello down into the basement, but that he vanished. And then Cruz says, well, he's right over there. So he doesn't believe that Maggie actually followed up a viable lead and says, don't even approach him about that because it's all conjecture.
Cruz really needs to start believing people.
That's another thing that he's just blown off that's actually a real clue to something happening. Mason spots Gina taking a pill, and then he tells her to meet him in room 400. They spot Cece dancing with Santana, and Mason says, oh, they make a handsome couple, probably because they used to be a couple. So that obviously gets on Gina's nerves a bit. Then we see that Cece is asking Santana if she's actually going to stick around in Santa Barbara. She doesn't really say yes or no to that, but she just says that she has no designs on Brandon, and that she's more worried about Channy's killer running free. And mentions that Mason was on that suspect list. Then she leaves and gets in the elevator, and Mason follows her in.
Actually, I think it went the other way, didn't it? Because Mason left for his rendezvous with Gina, and I think Santana says something to Cece like, "Oh, I've got to go and talk to someone," and I think she actually followed him into the elevator.
Okay. She sees Mason press 4 and says, "Was she such a dog you couldn't bring her to the party?"
Santana is in a very feisty mood during this entire elevator conversation. And I wasn't quite sure why it was she was very anxious to talk to Mason, unless it was to pump him for a bit more information, because he's only really given her broad strokes about Marcello. He has refused to say anything at all about Lindsay. And she knows that he's on the suspect list as well. So I think she feels that he knows a little bit more about that day of Channing's murder and the suspects.
Maybe she thinks she needs to investigate the murder herself, since Cruz is doing such a lousy job.
Well, she seems to have a definite Nancy Drew streak to her.
So suddenly the elevator comes to an unexpected stop in between floors. Between the 4th and 5th floor. So Mason takes the opportunity to tell Santana all about the people that Channing was blackmailing, Lionel and Warren and Lindsay. Was it Lindsay? No, Peter and him. And that, he did want to kill Channing, but he didn't do it.
And Santana's pushing him hard. She's actually being a bit harsh on him.
Mm-hmm.
But I think she has to be to achieve what this scene, I think, is meant to achieve.
Mm-hmm. So then, Mason's trying to edge towards talking about Lindsay in a backward way. So he says, "Why did he have you give your baby away?" And she says, "Oh, it was because we were young." And he says, "No, it's because you're Mexican. Did he even visit you in Acapulco, or write you, or call you, or send you flowers?"
Mm-hmm.
And it's obvious from her face that he never did. And Mason says, "Well, I would have." So I don't know if he's still trying to get back with Santana. It sounds like it.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "You know what? I have something to show you later that will show you what Channing was really all about."
And he also makes the comment to her that Channing could never have made a commitment to her.
Mm.
And I think, given the way the conversation's gone at this point, he's already pointed out that she's Mexican, and that might have been a bit of a problem. But obviously, knowing what we know about Channing, we know that there was another issue there as well.
Mm-hmm. So he says he's going to stop by at 10 o'clock and show her some pictures, some moving pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Cruz spots Marcello playing with the controls of the elevators.
Not suspicious at all.
Oh, so that's why the elevator screeched to a halt.
So I was kind of right. You were asking me a lot about the elevator, and he did end up sabotaging it. I don't know why, though. So
he sabotaged what I call elevator number 2,
yeah,
which is the one on the left. So there's an elevator that we see face on,
mm-hmm.
Which was the one that Marcello got in the other day with his chair. And then there's 90-degree angle, an elevator, the one Kelly went into the other day, and the one Mason and Santana are in today. So he's obviously got plans for both elevators. He knows how to disable elevator number 2, and he's done something in the ceiling of elevator number 1. And on top of that, when the workers come to figure out what's wrong with number 2, they put an out-of-order sign on it, and Marcello is just waiting for that because he steals the sign as soon as they put it up.
Now, at first, when he stole this sign, I thought, well, what is he going to do next? But I'm actually going with the feeling that maybe he just needs that sign for some future part of his plans. Because he didn't seem to do anything afterwards.
Well, it seems like he's going to turn off elevator number 2 and put an out-of-order sign on it to make sure
mm-hmm.
that people get into the number 1 elevator that he's tampered with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But the party ends at the end of this episode, so he must have some designs on the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he seems to still be working on
mm-hmm.
things. It's interesting that he's doing it in the middle of the party, not, he could probably stay late at night and have free reign of the upper floors after the staff have cleaned, but he's doing these things in plain sight.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, we've all been to dull parties, but it does seem to be a little bit much to be doing it in the middle of all this.
Mm-hmm. So the 2 workers open up the panel, immediately see that the switch is flicked, turn it back on, close the door, and say, "Job well done."
Mm-hmm.
Then they promptly forget about their sign, because they never go to retrieve it.
They go wandering off somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. To another mystery thing on the roof number 1, 8th floor. So the elevator restarts, of course, but meanwhile Gina has been in room 400 for quite a while waiting for Mason, and she just gets tired of it and assumes that he's actually just playing another game with her.
Mm-hmm.
So she throws the key down and leaves and goes back to the party and has another pill and some champagne. Spots Santana, who's just come back now, and says that she's not getting Cece or Brandon. And then Santana says she has no designs on Cece. And Gina replies, "That's what Sophia said, and look at her." Points over there, and Sophia's surrounded by her family, and she's giving a toast to Cruz and Eden.
Yeah, Sophia seems to be doing just fine.
Yeah, I think all of Sophia's troubles are pretty much gone.
Mm-hmm.
Except that she has these long gaps in her memory. Mason finds Gina gone in room 400 and returns to the party and tells her there was elevator trouble. So he's trying to reschedule this meeting.
I'm going to be interested to see how this plays out, because this might give Gina a bit of a chance to reset things, him not showing up and so on, if she has a mind to do it. But given that she's bonked out on pills most of the time, she may not be quite her usual wily self.
Marcello asks Kelly to dance, and just as they start, the courier comes crashing through the skylight, lands on the dance floor, and is pronounced dead. So that's 10 episodes for Martine Beswick as the courier. So we're going to have another Santa Barbara Cemetery as a bonus this week.
Yeah.
Maggie returns from the roof with a handcuffed Nick, and he tells everyone, oh yeah, she had a gun and she was going to kill Kelly, and everyone's quite skeptical of him.
Yeah.
Even Cruz. I mean, he's the only one who knows Nick. And so she doesn't have a gun. He goes, oh no, I kicked it under that table over there, and Maggie retrieves it, and they unhandcuff Nick, and Cece quickly bundles Kelly out the door and down the elevator, so Nick never gets a chance to even talk to Kelly, which obviously he would have wanted to right after that.
I was really relieved that they found the gun right away, though, because I didn't really want to go through a whole thing of Nick having to prove his innocence and blah, blah. I'm glad they got that out of the way.
So Nick decides... Oh, Cruz finds out that the courier was a professional assassin. Because Nick actually says that the courier had revealed that she was just following orders. So it definitely means someone's out to kill Kelly Capwell. And someone's hired a professional assassin to do it. So Nick goes to the Capwell mansion to check on Kelly, but Marcello and Cece open the door. Don't let him get in. And he said, oh, I just wanted to see if Kelly's okay. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll pass on the message, and slam the door in his face. And there's a new guard standing, outside the door, obviously, for this new threat. He says to the guard, after all, I only saved her life.
I was thinking about this, and I can definitely see Marcello not wanting anyone to get in the way of his plans, whatever they are. But I'm thinking with CC, his attitude, I'm getting a little bit of the vibe he used to have with Joe Perkins. That, here's this kind of common guy, he's just a photographer, and he's interested in Kelly, and I think CC's, little biases are kicking in, where he doesn't really think he's worthy of Kelly. That's what I'm getting from that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, on Marcello's side, I guess, it'd be just like with Jack Stanfield Lee and Brick. It's like, we don't need this extra guy. I have these plans for May the 20th. We don't need more people hovering around the family that I don't have, a complete eye on.
Especially a guy who's taken down a professional assassin. Now, Marcello doesn't know his background and whatever it was, the CIA or something, but, even that fact that he's alert enough to have known about a threat and dealt with it is not something Marcello wants around.
Nope. Mason uses his old key to get into Santana's apartment.
And it's just as we remembered.
Yeah, so she must have been paying the rent on that the whole time.
Yeah.
And he calls for her, and there's no answer. It's not entirely clear if she's there, maybe already asleep or something, but no, actually she's just asleep on that pull-out couch in the middle of the room, so she must be out still. So he has his videotape. He puts it into the videotape player, as Mason called it. I guess VCR would be a copyrighted name, I think. And he plays his little introduction. Hey, Dad, it's me, Mason. Wondering what I'm doing on your TV. And he says, hurry home, Santana. He says, hurry home, Santana. It's showtime. He used his it's showtime line again that he previously gave Ted. That's twice now. He's tried showtime, and we'll see if Santana actually sees the video.
Yeah, this is really twisting the knife in, actually. Like, there's such a big difference between him potentially gently telling her and actually showing her this video of the...
And if he lets her see the intro, she's gonna be like, "You're planning to show this to Cece as well, like this?"
Yeah.
So that'll be an interesting.
Well, Ted didn't have a very good reaction to it, although
No.
it did, I think, get him thinking a little bit. But he thought it was very manipulative on Mason's part to do it that way. So
And ended up punching Mason as a result.
Yeah.
I wonder if it'll be like the Sophia's Alive secret. If it's going to work its way around all of the members of the family before Cece finally gets it.
It'll be like that
The Dream Curse on
horror
Dark Shadows.
movie, the Ring, where people pass around the cursed videotape.
Maybe that's where they got the idea for that movie. Which came first?
I think The Ring was originally, was it a Hong Kong movie or a Korean movie? I think it
Maybe
actually
Korean.
was originally from Asia,
All
but I don't
right.
know when.
That is it for the stories, but we have a new person showed up on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
6 Degrees of Buck Rogers, go.
6 Degrees of Buck Rogers. Was she on an episode of Buck Rogers?
Erin Gray was in Buck Rogers as Wilma Deering.
Okay.
And, of course, she played Kate Summers on Silver Spoons
Ah.
with Ricky Schroeder. And Ricky Schroeder's best friend, Derek Taylor, was played by Jason Bateman, who got his own show on the strength of that supporting character, where he played Matthew Burton in It's Your Move. And his sister, Julie Burton, was played by Trisha Cast, who is playing Christy Duvall on Santa Barbara.
And what would the timeline of that have been?
It was just the year before this that It's Your Move aired. It only aired for one season.
Because I think of Jason Bateman as being on, I think it was originally Valerie's Family.
That was one of his later.
But that would have been after. Yeah.
Yeah, so it says 84, 85 here. Don't have the dates actually probably at the top. No, it just says 84, 85, but we can assume September 84 to May-ish 85.
Well, I did think the actress looked a little bit familiar, although I actually never saw Silver Spoons, but I probably saw her around.
I think you've probably seen her maybe in her most recent role, or her current role, which I'm just clicking on, because she has been on The Young and the Restless since 1986.
Oh, really?
As Nina, Webster, McNeil, Chancellor. So you've probably either seen her in flashbacks or things about The Young and Restless, or just in general soap opera things. So
Cool.
That's where I occasionally see her again and think, hey, it's Christy Duvall. And that is it for episode 203 of Santa Barbara. We'll be back after we watch episode 204. Bye.
Bye-bye.
A smuggler assassin known only as Brandy, going by the name of Carla, was unlucky enough to cross paths with Kelly Capwell on her way to Santa Barbara. Having whatever she was smuggling inadvertently hidden in Kelly Capwell's similar bag, Brandy had no choice but to track down Kelly Capwell. Kelly sped things along by delivering the package to Parker Simonson, and the man posing as Jack Stanfield Lee, who was supposed to be in Europe. To keep Kelly from revealing that she had seen the doppelganger, Parker Simonson sent Brandy to kill Kelly Capwell. Nearly succeeding at the train museum, where Kelly caught the eye of photographer ex-spy Nick Hartley, Brandy was now in Nick's sights. Trying once again to kill Kelly at the grand opening of the Orient Express, she ended up battling Nick Hartley on the roof of the Capwell Hotel, her life ending as she crashed through the skylight onto the dance floor below. Santa Barbara Cemetery welcomes another new resident, who would still be alive if not for Kelly Capwell.
Welcome back to Misha Dianne, West Santa Barbara.
Hello.
This is episode 204. Originally aired Tuesday, May 14th, 1985. Mason wakes up on Santana's couch. She never came home last night. She comes home next morning and is not entirely shocked that he's there, I guess, but is a little annoyed. He wants to show her the tape of Channing and Lindsay. Santana says, Channing loved me. That's one thing you cannot change. So after she watches the tape, she accuses him of faking it. And then he presents her with the letter that Lindsay wrote to Channing. And she demands the letter, the photos, and all the negatives. And she ends up grabbing a large kitchen knife and threatens to cut his heart out and forces him to throw the tape into the fire. And then she says she's worried about Brandon, and she doesn't care if it's true or false as long as no one believes it.
Yeah, so we saw Ted's reaction, which was quite a bit more dramatic than Ted usually. It went to a dramatic place, much more so than Ted usually goes to. Santana was that times about 100. I don't know quite what Mason expected, but it wasn't that.
No.
I'm pretty sure.
No, I don't think so.
So it does, I mean, as Mason pointed out to her, burning the tape, burning the letter, wasn't really going to do anything. The letter was a copy. The tape, as we know, is actually a tape made from a bunch of photographs, and presumably they still exist, and perhaps the negatives as well. So, you know, she hasn't really destroyed very much. It does make me a little bit concerned for Lindsay's safety, but...
Yeah, because we remember what Santana tried to do to Joe Perkins.
Now, the funny thing is, one of the things we do learn in this is what is actually on the tape. Because when Santana watches the tape, Mason's actually technically left. He's left her with the tape, but he actually doesn't go away. He actually just sits outside the door and listens. And we can actually hear the full narration of the tape. And it's really, the narration is around probably about 4 or 5 photographs. And the last one, sort of the big finale, is a very blurry photo of Channing and Lindsay sharing a kiss.
Inside the secret room in the tunnel.
Yes. Now, I mean, today we live in an era of dick pics. So this seems incredibly innocent.
He actually says to Santana beforehand there's nothing pornographic in there. But, I mean, that was a big album of photos. I'm wondering if he just decided to trim down the volume to just the important ones to make his point so that Cece wouldn't get more upset with him than with Channing.
Now, you know, if it is part of a larger album, which are all sorts of pictures of Channing's relationship with Lindsay, in a way, that should be even more concerning for Santana, because it's one thing to have a little slip, perhaps, but to actually have a full-bodied relationship with someone, I think would in many ways shatter her fantasy a little bit more.
Yeah, I suspect she will be having a meeting with Lindsay Smith in the very near future.
Yeah, I suspect she will. And I will be very interested as this little story unfolds to hear a bit more about, you know, how Lindsay went from being this passionate lover of Channing's to then teaming up with Peter Flint to blackmail him. I think that'll be quite an interesting story if he survives the wrath of Santana.
At the houseboat, Nick arrives and starts talking to Cruz before he realizes that Eden's in bed. And Cruz says, oh, don't worry, she's not shy.
We have a hilarious scene, actually, where they're talking about all this stuff, and she's just kind of lying there in bed listening to them.
So the first thing he says, I don't buy this bit about someone trying to cash in on the Carnation Killer thing. So I don't know if that was, you know, after yesterday's episode, if the police were, like, kicking around different ideas, if the press was involved in coming up with the idea that maybe it was just somehow someone trying to cash in, and there wasn't really a hit out on Kelly.
That's how I took it.
Mm-hmm. But Nick is pretty adamant that Kelly's in danger. And we cut to Parker Simonson and Jack Stanfield Lee reading the paper. And Parker Simonson says, Nick Hartley, another name to remember. Or one more name to remember. So, they're worried about more and more people being involved in this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then Jack Stanfield Lee thinks that, well, now if the police are questioning her, she's definitely going to remember meeting that courier at the airport, and then she's going to bring the police here to the house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, lo and behold, Cruz does ask Kelly to remember her day at the train park, and she actually remembers the courier gave her name as Carla, which Cruz says, we can add that to the long list of aliases. And then Nick says, now you just come back from vacation. Was there anything weird that happened on vacation? And that prompts Kelly to remember the bit at the airport, the mixed up bags, and the fact that there was an unfamiliar package in her bag that she delivered.
Yeah.
So, of course, the three of them troop out to the house, where they encounter a realtor. Sort of a comedy casting on the realtor.
Yeah.
When he had kind of a wacky name, which I can't recall. Cletus Manley is the name of the realtor. And he says, I thought you were the Hendersons. I guess you're not. And Cruz said, no, we're the police. So he opens it up for them, and it's totally deserted, and there's like just wood lying everywhere and dust everywhere. And there's no evidence that anyone was living there any time recently. He actually says it's been deserted for 10 years. And Kelly's pretty adamant that she's got the right house. She says to Nick, they can fake dust, can't they? Mm-hmm. And Nick agrees, and the realtor says, yeah, with trained spiders, I think. So he's poo-pooing, the whole concept that there could have been someone in there. He said, well, then they must have moved in and out on my day off, and put all the dust back after they were done. So after they leave, of course, the realtor calls Parker Simonson and says they bought it.
I think one of the three of them bought it. I think Kelly and Nick will be back.
Yes, I think they will come back. Now, will Jack Stanfield Lee and Parker Simonson move back in there? Because when we saw them on the phone with the realtor, it was a pretty extreme close-up of Parker Simonson's face, and we could just see a window behind him and a bit of a curtain. And for a second, I thought it might be Jack Stanfield Lee's office, which is probably safe if Amy's out of town. Or have they moved to a new place where they're going to be living? So yeah, we'll see. If they move back to the house, then I suspect Nick and Kelly are going to sneak back there.
I strongly suspect, too, when they were there, I can't remember if it was Kelly or Nick, said, could we search the house? And Cruz said, no, that we don't have
No, without a warrant, yeah.
But in a way that didn't entirely make sense to me, because if this was an actual realtor, they would be able to look at the house as potential buyers. So it seemed to me they could perhaps do a sort of informal look around the house, since it was available for open houses.
Yeah, that's true.
But at any rate, it would have been interesting. I mean, if they had actually, I just strongly suspect that if they'd gone upstairs, they wouldn't have found the dust and mess. I think it was just, considering the timeline that we saw Parker and Jack there, what appeared to be not that long before Kelly and Cruz and Nick showed up.
They would have had to mobilize a whole strike team of movers, and then, presumably, if Cruz actually canvassed all the neighbors, they'd say, oh yeah, there was a moving van there this morning. They ran it out in 30 minutes.
AKA, if Cruz had done his job.
He's once again blowing off any clues.
Yeah. But I just strongly suspect that if they'd gone beyond that living room, they would have seen a very different house.
So that now Jack Stanfield Lee is worried that Kelly can connect him to Brandy. So we actually get the real name of the courier now that she's dead.
Yeah.
Parker Simonson calls another hit. And he gets upset with the guy on the other end. He says, no, this is not related to Amy Perkins. You're still supposed to follow her. This is Kelly Capwell Perkins. So it's kind of scary that they might accidentally have killed Amy instead of Kelly if they hadn't clarified with with him who they were supposed to kill.
Well, you know, this could still be a possible plot point if the next assassin does follow the wrong Perkins. There's still a few of them out there.
There's still Jade and Marissa. A group of reporters at the Capwell Hotel, 8th floor, including, once again, our Clark Griswold that we met a few months ago, are interviewing Eden, and they're focused on the negative of last night, but also another one of them says, is this really going to be a viable restaurant, or are you just playing with your daddy's money? Which, of course, is really insulting to Eden. Later, Eden tells Sophia that with all this bad luck, there might not even be a wedding. And Sophia says that good things are going to start happening for Eden. And then Eden says she's just glad that Sophia's going to be there.
Oh, that's nice.
Cruz, Nick, and Kelly return, and Eden's got her wedding dress downstairs, so she tries to gets Kelly to distract Cruz, and she sneaks it up the stairs and into Kelly's room. But then Cruz barges in, and she's all upset that Cruz saw the wedding dress. And he says, I don't know what you're so upset about. It's only unlucky if I see wearing it. So, but I guess she's thinking there's been enough bad luck that this would count. So he tries to get her to change into it for him. Marcello was actually hanging around during that interview on the 8th floor. Was watching the workmen in elevator number 1 because they were on a ladder looking into the light fixtures that we had previously seen Marcello doing something with. So I wonder if, whatever he did caused the elevator not to function properly and they're investigating that. Or if it's just a coincidence. Or maybe because of elevator number 2 being down, Cece's ordered them to do a complete top-to-bottom check of of both elevators.
Well, regardless, Marcello is still skulking around.
Next time we see him, he's in the basement again, and now he has 2 wooden crates, about this big, that he's opening with a crowbar, but we never get to see what's inside. And the 3 workmen come down the stairs, and Marcello hides, kind of leaves the crates there in the middle of the room, and the workmen just kind of step around them and don't even notice, so that's good, I guess, for Marcello.
Yeah.
And they all 3 get in the elevator and the door closes, so Marcello doesn't take the opportunity to move the crates any further out of the line of sight. But he does go into an adjoining office that we haven't seen before. And there he discovers a security monitor, which he turns on, and he can see a live feed from inside the elevator.
So his plan involves dynamite, something to do with the elevators, something to do with the yacht. That's what we know so far.
Later back home, Sophia arrives, and what I get from this scene is that she's trying to snoop, but pretending she wants to make up with Marcello. She says, oh, let's go for, a meal or a drive. And he says, oh, yeah, drive sounds good. And he goes to get changed, and she starts looking around, and he comes back all changed. She says, oh, can you find me the latest copy of the merger documents? Gives her an excuse to send him away again, and then this time she pulls a yellow piece of paper from under his briefcase, and it's typewritten in Dutch or German. And at the top is the date, May the 20th, 1944. And Sophia really twigs to that fact. She says, oh, it's the same day as Eden's wedding. And she actually finds it a little bit shocking. It's more than just a coincidence, I guess she's thinking.
Actually, it is a coincidence.
It is a complete coincidence, so it's not shocking at all.
But one of the things that added a bit of tension, I thought, to this little scene is as Sophia's trying to get at this piece of paper, she's kind of shuffling around the briefcase on top of it. And I wasn't sure if this was the briefcase with the dynamite in it or not, but it did definitely add a bit of tension.
I'm thinking it's probably not the same briefcase, because that would be a bit risky for Marcello to have it lying there.
Yeah, to just be carrying it around. Yeah.
So it's probably the briefcase that the dog tags were in that Eden found.
But it does add kind of sinister optics to it.
Yeah, because we don't know. We
Yeah.
don't know what's in there.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see what was in those crates.
Mm-hmm.
But we've only got a few more days before we find out. Because May the 20th approaches faster than we realize.
Yeah.
So tomorrow we will watch the Wednesday, May 15th episode number 205. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
It's Wednesday, May 15th, 1985. And we've watched episode 205 of Santa Barbara. Jack Stanfield Lee is on a plane talking to Parker Simonson on a video phone.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of impressive. I thought at first it might be the same monitor that Marcello had found in the office, and they were doubling up, but it actually looks to be a different style.
Yeah, so he's got the very latest in technology, it looks like.
Mm-hmm. Now Jack is having a cigarette, as we know Jack loves, and Parker Simonson complains that Jack is smoking. Jack says, "Oh, it's my last one for a while," and Parker says, "It's the little things that will give you away." What do you think?
Well, I think that doppelganger idea is looking more and more possible.
Mm-hmm. I think so. They discuss the ongoing search for Amy, who we haven't seen in a while. We have seen Brick a little more recently.
Mm-hmm.
And that Kelly is being taken care of as they speak. And that's when we see the new assassin. He is a bearded guy. He's in the woods.
Basically, Kelly's been stalked by Wolverine.
He is watching Kelly through his sniper rifle, and she is in the Capwell study, and we see, a view of a sight through the window.
Mm-hmm.
But lots going on in the study. Kelly keeps moving around. She's chatting with Marcello. Then some others come in, and he never quite gets his aim.
No.
So Kelly is telling Marcello that she can't concentrate, and Marcello says that she needs to keep herself busy. And she says, "Well, you won't even let me help her with the wedding." So Marcello comes up with an idea. He says, "What if I'm come to stay here for a while?" Kelly thinks that's great.
Oh, she's excited.
And I guess Cece will too, because he loves Marcello now. So she says, "Oh yeah, you'll have your own room. You can swim a lot, because I know you love to swim."
Yeah, it's so interesting when you think of all the twists and turns Cece's relationship has taken with Marcello, as it actually has with so many people, going from hostility and, basically not wanting him to treat Kelly, and then when he finds out he's really Hans and he's feeling guilty and wants to make amends, suddenly Marcello is welcome into the family.
Mm-hmm. Now, Eden tells Cruz he only has 2 hours to get dressed. Mm-hmm. So, does that mean it's May the 20th?
I don't know.
Does that mean it's the wedding day? It seems to be, because she was talking about him getting into a tuxedo, right?
Weren't they talking about a luncheon quite a bit today?
Oh, maybe it's for a luncheon. That would make more sense based on the rest of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
But we never get to that point in the day. So
no, it's solidly morning for most of this episode,
mm-hmm.
I think.
So Cruz and Nick are actually busy scoping out the hallway. It's a yellow hallway. I think it's the one in front of the study.
Mm-hmm.
But it may have been repainted or lighted differently. But we'll see for sure. But they say something like, "Oh, this'll do." So I think they are planning to lay a trap for whoever's trying to kill Kelly.
Multitasking.
Having a wedding and opening a restaurant and catching a killer. Cruz mentions to Eden that he couldn't reach his brother. So now we know Cruz has a brother.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore Nick will be his best man.
So isn't it interesting how quickly Nick has sort of slid into the Joe Perkins, Cruz's best friend.
Potential love interest for Kelly.
And protector of Kelly for sure.
Guy that Cece doesn't seem to like that much.
Yeah.
Wonder how Mason will feel about him.
Yeah, Mason hasn't really had an interaction with him, has he?
No, not yet. He's got a few people to meet still.
Mm-hmm.
So Nick tells Eden that Cruz got down on one knee and begged him to be his best man. And Eden says, he didn't even do that for me. Nick meets Marcello in the study. And Cruz starts showing Kelly mugshots while Nick turns on the TV.
Mm-hmm.
And Marcello makes comments about, I can't believe you're still using mugshots. He says, well, we could use hypnotism, but this'll do for what we're trying. He just wants Kelly to point out people with similar hair or chins or whatever to the guys she saw, or I guess any of the guys she saw in that house. But specifically, I think we are most interested in Jack Stanfield Lee, because when the news report comes on the TV that Nick's watching about Jack Stanfield Lee returning to Santa Barbara after a week in the European country of New Staland, Kelly says that's him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now we know that New Staland is a country, and it's in Europe. And Cruz, Nick, and Kelly announce they're going to the airport, much to Gina's chagrin, because, of course, he doesn't want Kelly to leave the house at all.
Yeah.
Then we see Eden doing calligraphy while Sophia watches, and that she seems to be writing wedding invitations, so once again it makes sense this is not the wedding day, because 2 hours before the wedding would be a bit late to be writing invitations, whereas 2 days before the wedding is more than enough
fair
time.
Game. Yeah.
And then she says we'll need a caterer, so once again 2 days before the wedding, perfect time to try and get a big caterer for our big Santa Barbara wedding. So she starts flipping through the phone book. And she says, I wanted to have it at the Orient Express, but Daddy wants Kelly to stay home.
This is actually a really nice scene between Sophia and Eden, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are they going to move the wedding to the house then, if Kelly's not allowed to go out?
Or maybe the yacht.
I mean, that's still out.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Gina comes to try and wreck it. She says, "Oh, who gave you permission to sit here at this table? I'm the lady of the house. I make all the rules here." And Eden says, "Oh, you can make all the rules you want. I'm not going to follow them. This is my father's house." And Gina says, "Well, you could have consulted me." And she said, "Oh, we decided to let you sleep it off."
Yeah, we see Eden and Sophia really almost playing team tag on the standing up to Gina.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
Yeah.
Sophia doesn't in any way feel that she needs to be directed or ordered around by Gina in any way.
No,
So
no.
just ignores her, basically.
Yeah.
Mason calls Gina as if she didn't have enough to worry about, and tells her to meet him at a motel right away.
Mm-hmm.
She leaves a note for Rosa with the phone number of the hotel in case of emergency. Takes a pill, has a quick conversation with Brandon about how pills help her with her headaches and that it's their secret that she's taking them. And then she puts them in one of the bureaus near the stairs and heads out.
Mm-hmm.
Brandon immediately goes to the pills and takes one and says, "Oh, I don't feel better yet. I'll take another one. Oh, I don't feel better yet. I'll take another one." So he takes 3 along with his milk. And then he goes... Then he's actually all alone in the house because everyone else is gone. Rosa's gone out with Carmen. Assume Eden's gone at some point. And Marcello picked up Sophia and they left. So he's playing in his room alone, and he's got a little balsa wood airplane glider that he throws out the window, or throws, and it goes out the window. Ends up gliding onto a little sloping roof from the adjacent wing of the house. And Brandon, being kind of loopy by this point, decides to climb out of the window and onto the sloped, those terracotta tiles. Is that terracotta? Is that the right
I
word
think
for those?
so, yeah.
Adobe colored things. And he almost makes it to the airplane, but then he slips. Cliffhanger. But next we see he's wedged up against a pillar. So I don't know if he pulled back from that view, if the pillar would really make sense there. But for a fairly close shot of the room and half a roof, I guess a pillar could be there for some reason. He ends up falling asleep there. Rosa and Carmen return and can't find him anywhere. And they rat out Gina immediately when Cece arrives.
Yeah.
And Cece is furious. And Rosa calls Santana.
And by leaving the note, which seemed to be kind of a responsible thing, I mean, doing an irresponsible thing overall, but taking this one semi-responsible step, Gina's actually implicated herself because, she can't say, oh, I was just outside or whatever. She's actually laid out that she's gone and left Brandon alone.
She did tell Brandon that Rosa was expected back in about 15 minutes when she left. Back at the motel, Mason offers Gina some $4 champagne and kisses her. And after a short time, she decides no kissing. She hasn't signed the papers yet. Suddenly the phone rings, and it's Cece with the news that Brandon is missing. So Gina runs out. Actually, Mason answers the phone because Gina said she left the number, so he does sort of a Marlon Brando-y voice that's not really recognizable, and then hands the phone to Cece. So to Gina. So even though Cece may wonder who were you with, he wouldn't think it was Mason.
Yeah.
So Gina runs out, and Mason decides, why let a good cheap motel room and $4 champagne go to waste? He calls someone called Celeste instead. Now, I don't know if we know Celeste.
We assume it's one of his floozies.
So. Now, did we talk about Ginger's girls? Do we know that storyline is over?
It seems to have run its course because I think you mentioned the actress is basically left the series.
Yeah,
so.
Ginger's not scheduled to come back.
Yeah.
And the last thing the DA said to Mason was, I would recommend you tell Ginger to get out of town with her girls. And I guess that's what happened.
Yeah.
So if this Celeste is someone for hire, it's someone from a different list than that, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. And one thing I noticed in this scene, which I was kind of amused at, is Mason is wearing this very elaborate bathrobe, which it seems to be the season for elaborate bathrobes on this show. But when we were on the cruise, Lane Davies made the comment that in all of his romantic scenes, he's usually wearing a bathrobe because he wasn't, the fitness nut that some of the other actors were. So they don't have a lot of scenes of him half naked, whereas, some of the characters, like, Cruz, for example, is often shown shirtless. So
I don't know if Nick will fall into the shirtless category.
No, he may not.
He doesn't seem to be that type. There is a character in the future called Celeste. I don't know if there's any possibility of it being the same person. We'll keep our eye on that. I think it's going to be quite a while. Gina arrives home frantic. That's what she does best.
Well,
being
and
frantic.
To be fair, she's been a twitchy mess this entire episode.
Oh, yeah. She's Linda Gibney I think is really great as Gina.
Yeah, she's doing a really amazing job portraying this character who is both very manipulative, very underhanded, but also insecure, and also very vulnerable, but is continually sabotaging her own life and everyone else's.
Rosa goes on the attack, and among other things says that Brandon might be in a ditch. Gina blames Rosa when Cece arrives. Cece says, "Don't blame Rosa! You should never have left him alone."
And, Cece's really taking on this role with Gina, and we've seen a lot of things leading up to this, and maybe it is his style, but he's really doing this with Gina as almost the angry dad now, more than the romantic Lothario husband.
Yeah. Eden arrives, and Cece says to her, "Brandon's missing! Gina left him alone!" "My grandson's missing!" So he's now shouting that that's his grandson, without a care as to who hears it.
For that secret,
yeah.
Well, everyone knows by this time.
Everyone knows by now, but I like how he tells on Gina to Eden. Gina goes up to Brandon's room and finds Santana, the last thing she wants, and says, "We don't need you." And Santana replies, "I'm not going anywhere until my son is found." And it ends with Gina sitting on Brandon's bed, while Brandon sort of wakes up groggily, not too far away from there, but out of sight of Gina, and says weakly, "Mommy." So as long as he doesn't fall off that edge, he's probably fine.
So I'm thinking next episode, either Gina will notice he's there and reel him in somehow, or get someone to come and reel him in. Or I did wonder, I don't quite have a sense of the layout of this house, but with Cruz and Nick and Kelly still standing outside, if they might look up and notice him before Gina does.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and then there's an assassin too.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder if somehow those two things will link up somehow.
Well, that's the other thing with the assassin. We don't actually know if he's going to carry through with it, because Parker Simpson
is going to try and
tell him not to, because that the threat that Kelly seemed to pose is limited now.
On the other side of the fence, the doctor gives Augusta a white cane, and after he leaves, of course Lionel sneaks in, she knocks over some flowers while practicing with her cane and starts to cry, which is witnessed by Lionel and then Julia. Augusta ends up telling Julia that she needs a man, and points out that Julia has never needed a man. Julia says Augusta's gotten along fine so far. Augusta says, "That's because I have Jack Lee." And Julia kind of pulls a face and says, "I don't know about that." So, I don't know if that's just because she knows Lionel's the one who's been sending the furs, or if she knows more about Jack Lee's character than Augusta is willing to admit.
It could be all those things. It could be the fact that Jack Lee is not there and isn't phoning, and the only person who seems to think he could be remotely interested in Augusta is Augusta.
Lionel tells Lakin that Augusta needs a confidence boost. And just then, the doorbell rings and substitute milkman Frank Armstead comes to the door to collect for $57.50 worth of milk baths. And Lionel gets an idea. There's a funny exchange where Lakin explains that, in Augusta's state, she needed to take a lot of milk baths because she needed to be, and then Lionel says, "Milky?" So Lionel gets Julia and Lakin in on his idea as well, and he pays Frank to pretend to be a neighbor, and then Cyrano de Bergeracs him with Augusta. He gets Julia to introduce Frank to Augusta as their new neighbor, and with Augusta prompting on a notepad, Frank and Augusta have a conversation with Lionel prompting him. He convinces Augusta that he is an astronaut from a wealthy family with many investments. And although it's a rather odd conversation, Augusta actually kind of focuses in on the good parts and the interesting parts. And after he leaves, she says, he must have 50 women after him. She kicks out with her leg and ends up accidentally kicking Lionel, who's standing too close. She says, "Is somebody there?" And then she starts feeling around right where Lionel is. So I think this is going to be a couple of wacky storyline, I think.
Yeah, it's got that vibe, definitely. Now, I think you and I were mentioning today, before we started this podcast, just mentioning to each other that this is kind of one of those storylines you might have expected in the 1950s. Much like Amy, Will She Survive Her Pregnancy storyline, probably about a month or so ago. It's got a little bit of that vintage vibe to it, I think.
Well, the going blind suddenly thing definitely
is.
And you almost don't expect it this early in a soap or in a character's storylines. But it's not all about Augusta. It's also about Lionel. It's about their divorce. and maybe to some extent about Julia, not just introducing her, but having her take care of her sister for a few weeks after 10 years of not speaking. So I think there are three, probably maybe 2 or 3 or 4 different storylines that have grown out of that. So
yeah, it could actually be an interesting way to develop out the character of Julia a little bit more, because we don't know much about her yet.
Mm-hmm.
And her relationship with Lionel, who she barely knows. And I guess Laken and Warren eventually too, and Minx perhaps too.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, Minx hasn't had a scene with her yet.
We haven't seen that. So just having her build out these relationships and sort of the dynamic between her and these other characters, with Augusta somewhat taken out of it. I mean, she's at the center of it, but they're all playing out their own storylines around her.
I mean, you'd think Laken would be happy to have someone else she could talk about her man troubles to, other than her mom or her teacher, who's kind of dating the guy she's having troubles with.
Yeah. And, you know, she and Jade were sort of put out with each other at the party. So I guess they kind of have little, as many teenage girls do, they have these little times of being friends and frenemies.
In the basement of the Capwell Hotel, Marcello finishes screwing something into the elevator panel.
Mm-hmm.
And once he finishes, he tests his handiwork. He has a remote control, and he presses the button, and the elevator number 1 comes down to the basement floor.
Mm-hmm.
Then he presses another button, and he sends it up to the 8th floor. Then he presses another button, and it comes back down. But at some point in this, Eden's gotten on the elevator, and it gets to the bottom, and she's inside going, I don't want to go down further, I want to go up. And then the door starts to open, and I guess Marcello, I don't know if he senses someone's in there or he glimpses the edge of Eden, but he manages to run into the little office before Eden. Mm-hmm. The door fully opens and Eden can see him. So Eden looks out, and she's blaming all this on the workmen who have been working on this elevator since Mason got trapped in the other one. Mm-hmm. And she shouts for them, and of course no one answers. She says, your equipment's here! Whatever it is, why aren't you here? And of course she's referring to Marcello's equipment. He has some little black metal contraption set up just in the sight of Eden. So we don't know what that is yet.
Now I'm wondering how this is going to figure into the storyline, because we don't even know where the wedding's going to be. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't seem like it's necessarily designed to disrupt the wedding. The luncheon, which is supposed to happen in a few hours, was that what they were looking for the catering for?
Well, that would be a bit short notice for that.
Wouldn't it? Yeah.
I assumed that she was looking for catering for the wedding.
Yeah. So maybe they're having the luncheon at the Orient Express. Maybe this is supposed to happen for the luncheon.
Mm.
Or maybe it's something completely different.
I don't know. I think we will find out pretty quick, because Friday's the wedding. Well, Monday, but I assume Friday will be the cliffhanger leading into Monday. So. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The killer follows Kelly and the gang to the airport, our new killer, and a lot of reporters, like there's at least 15 or 20 extras that are playing reporters, are, trying to interview Jack Stanfield Lee, and so Cruz and Kelly and Nick are really actually blocked very convincingly from being able to get a sight of Jack or even get to him. Cruz and Nick are holding on to Kelly's jacket, but she manages to slip out of it and wedge her way around the edge of the reporters and follows Jack Lee into the men's room. And there she quizzes him about whether or not he recognizes her, and he obviously pretends not to. And she asks if he was in a certain house the other day looking for cigarettes. And he says, well, I've never smoked a day in my life, and I've just been in Europe for well over a week. So, and he calls her Carrie. She had introduced herself as Kelly, but he calls her Carrie on purpose, because then she says, no, I'm Kelly Capwell. And then he can follow up with, are you Cece's daughter? And reveal that he knows Cece. So this is actually very clever of Jack or whoever.
Yeah.
So Kelly ends up coming out of the men's room convinced that she made a mistake, that it was another guy who just looked similar. And so Jack calls Parker on a payphone, I guess, or maybe when he gets back to his office, to call off the hitman. And Parker says it might already be too late. Back at the Capwell mansion, everyone's back in the study, and the assassin takes aim with his rifle. Taking a look at the top of elevator number 1, when Marcel's in the basement, we can actually see how many floors there are now on the elevator panel, and it's a few more than we had when the show first started. It looks like there's basement, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then roof. But I'm pretty sure when we first saw the elevator, lobby was the third one, and there were 2 below the lobby. So it's interesting now there's only 1. But then again, one of the elevators might go to different floors than the others.
Yeah.
So that is it for the plot. And we remember on the cruise that someone mentioned Ronnie Shell. And you asked me who that is. And I said, I don't know who that is. And I thought, maybe it's one of the Lakins, or 2 of the Lakins. Because Julie Ronnie is Lakin, number 1, and Shell Danielson was the 3rd Lakin, 2nd Lakin. So... but it turns out Ronnie Shell is the guy who plays Frank Armstead. And
Cool.
I didn't remember this storyline until the second Frank walked in, and I said, Frank Armstead, and then I remembered the whole Cyrano de Bergerac thing. So it's interesting after 35 years that things will just pop back into your mind that you couldn't really call to mind before. So it is May of 1985, and Santa Barbara's not the only show on television. There are cliffhangers happening all over the place in prime time. For example, last week on May 9th, Sam flew to Italy to stop Diane from marrying Frasier Crane in the season finale of Frasier, Season 3. And tonight, we've got something exciting that I'm sure a lot of Santa Barbara fans would also watch. Unlike in Santa Barbara, where the unsuspecting cast thinks they're going to a wedding that will turn into a massacre, tonight at 9, the cast of Dynasty flies to Moldavia for an episode titled Royal Wedding in the Season 5 finale that I imagine will someday come to be known as the Moldavian Fairy Tale. So we will watch that tonight with bated breath. Wonder if Moldavia is anywhere near New Zealand.
And actually, if you ever want a bit more of a perspective on that, I think it was Gordon Thompson, who played Adam Carrington, has given very entertaining interviews about the state of everyone's contracts around the time that was being filmed.
Yep. That's it for episode 205. So we'll be back after we've watched A Royal Wedding, and then episode 206 of Santa Barbara. See you later.
Bye-bye.
He got down on one knee and asked me to be his best man.
Oh, you didn't do that for me.
Welcome back.
Hello.
It was a massacre! No, not in Santa Barbara. At the Royal Wedding in Moldavia last night on Dynasty. It's a week of weddings. Diana and Frasier, Amanda and Prince Michael cruised in Eden. And I've heard a rumor that tomorrow night's season finale of Dallas might continue with this theme. But in Santa Barbara, the sniper is stalking Kelly Capwell. But luckily he gets a call on the radio. And the hit is called off. Kelly is safe. Gina tries to get Cece to kick Santana out of the house. But he says she has as much right to be there as anyone.
I think Gina should find that a little concerning.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it seems like he would be in any way inclined to get back together with Santana, but just that he feels she has a right to be there.
I'm thinking that since everyone knows that she's Brandon's mother, he's probably fine with her seeing Brandon, and since he knows he's going to soon have legal custody of him.
Yeah.
The caterer arrives at 12:45, but Eden tells him the wedding party's probably cancelled. So, I don't know what a wedding party is necessarily, because the wedding's tomorrow. So, as we were thinking, this is a pre-wedding lunch?
Yeah, I was thinking, they had talked about a luncheon. I was thinking maybe it would even be like a little rehearsal or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But the caterer, you know, I'm assuming he has like a van full of stuff. If it was just the little tray he was carrying, that would maybe
That wouldn't
work.
feed the people who are there searching for Brandon even.
It's the kind of thing you might expect at a meeting in an office or something.
Mm-hmm. Now, the first 18 minutes of this show was in French. So we took some guesses, and basically I didn't understand anything. But there's one scene that I think I got the gist of, which we didn't talk about. Cece asked Gina why she was with Mason. And she says it was just to follow up on the Hank Judson case. So that's just totally a guess, based on the words I heard.
I didn't know what she was saying, but I assumed she was spinning a story for Cece.
Mm-hmm. And I heard her say Hank Judson, so I figured that is what she glommed on. So it sounds like Cece did recognize Mason's voice after all. Now, does he know we called a motel? Hopefully not.
Yeah, exactly, because that could really unravel whatever story Gina was telling him. The only thing in French that I didn't get, you know, that I was kind of concerned about not getting, was a scene that we see with Jack, Stanfield Lee, and Parker. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about something, and I have no idea what it was, but I was thinking maybe it would bear some light onto what was going on with Amy and what their plans were.
Yeah,
and I have no idea.
The scene happened after the sniper had already been called off, so it wasn't about that.
Yeah, so I have no idea. I sort of feel I missed something.
I was kind of hoping that YouTube's translation, auto-translate, would work, but there seems to be an issue with translating something from another language. It's insisting on translating from English, which is kind of stupid, since I'm trying to tell it that no, this is French, but oh well. Maybe we'll see if we can get your cell phone to do some translation next time we get a French episode, which unfortunately is coming up pretty soon. Could you
translate it? I guess you couldn't translate it into German somehow.
There was no option on YouTube of saying that the source language was French. And I think it's insisting that since I am in an English-speaking area, that it wants me to translate from English, which seems kind of goofy.
May need to employ some of those mad IT skills you have to make this work.
Well, Cruz and Nick discuss the possibility of Brandon having been kidnapped, and then Cruz says that they might be getting a ransom call, which causes, I think, either Rosa or Santana to shoot a nasty look at Gina. Kelly and Nick decide to check Brandon's windows for signs of forced entry to try and confirm that possibility. Although I would think if the house was empty, they could have forced themselves into any window, not just Brandon's. So. Plus, you know, what are the odds of kidnappers hitting right on the 15 minutes when the house is empty? Santana hears Brandon calling for his mommy, and she climbs out on the ledge and retrieves him, and Nick helps pull him through the window. And then Nick realizes from his Vietnam-era expertise that Brandon is in shock, and they rush him to the hospital. The doctor says Brandon ingested some powerful opioids, similar to the ones I prescribed for you, Gina, in front of everyone. Yeah. I didn't recognize that as the same doctor, but maybe it was.
I think it was, yeah, I think it was.
There have been so many doctors now, and I haven't really been keeping proper track of them, and IMDb has a bunch of doctors listed, but I would have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb to figure out who's who. Gina, who of course is pretending that she's long kicked the habit, says, "Oh, he must have found those old pills in one of the cupboards. I am totally to blame for this." And then a couple of people, Kelly and Cece, I think, kind of tell her, "Oh, no, you're not to blame." But Eden says to Cece, "How much more can you take from her?"
And of course, as she's saying this, she's, again being very sort of twitchy and not looking at all well. So.
Mm-hmm. And Cece says to Eden, "Don't you understand that Gina is carrying my baby and that we're starting a whole new family now?" It's kind of an odd thing to say to your kids about your future child. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're starting a whole new family now.
But when he said that, it kind of, I think, maybe justified a little bit Gina's fear. We've been seeing Gina actually taking up Mason on this offer to give her his, special blood type semen to get her pregnant. And, it just seemed like such a wild thing. But when you see Cece reacting that way, you realize that there actually is maybe a little bit of justification for her taking these extreme steps.
Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of an interesting thing with, I thought that all of the kids were going to inherit Cece's estate,
mm-hmm.
and there's 4/4, accounted for, and nothing for the new kid. But I think Mason had calculated it at $20 million a few months ago, that each person would get $5 million. But either yesterday or today, someone referred to Cece as a billionaire.
Mm-hmm.
So $20 million is nothing if Cece's a billionaire. So I don't know where he's planning for the rest of his money to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's got plenty of more shares to hand out to future kids, if that's the case. The doctor says that Gina can spend the night in Brandon's room, and when she's in there, Santana comes in and asks if she could stay as well, and they could take turns sleeping, and Gina surprisingly agrees to that. I think she's probably just exhausted and...
Yeah, strung out.
Mm-hmm.
However, it is worth remembering that there was a period where Santana and Gina were actually friends.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
They were both friends with agendas. I mean, Santana's agenda was around Brandon, and at that time she was still somewhat romantically linked to Cece, and Gina's agenda was to link up with Cece herself. But they were friends.
Mm-hmm. Lionel is at work. Unfortunately, a lot of this is in French because I'm sure it was played for comedy. I think the model that they were planning to hire to pose on the bed arrived. The woman did, but the man never showed up. I think that was the gist of the discussion Lionel had with the model. Mm-hmm. At one point, I thought Lionel was going to volunteer to get on the bed with her. But he ends up in the next room where some news people are interviewing Mr. Zimmerman, and I don't know if this is some all-day live remote broadcast from Zimmerman's store, because they're there for the entire time, and Lionel ends up convincing Mr. Zimmerman that he can take the mic, and it's like he's suddenly in charge of a 3-ring circus, and he's interviewing random passers-by, and then he gets a woman to lie on the mattress to tell everyone how she feels about it, and she says, "Oh, it's kind of lumpy," and so, "Oh, you must be a real princess to feel a pee," and then he reaches under and he's got a softball hidden under it, so he's got all of these gags planned. So Mr. Zimmerman he's happy, for the attention and the promotion, but he's worried about what his wife would say, because it sounds like it's a fairly conservative family business, and this might just, stretch the limits of what she's expecting their advertising to be like.
Well, Lionel is a lot, and I think he's a bit too much potentially for a very conservative family-owned mattress business. That's I think what Zimmerman is worried about.
Mm-hmm. I think that's just the mattress department of a department store.
Yes, you're right.
But, could give the whole thing a bad name. Julia gives Augusta a gift from Lionel, a very long, what turns out to be a sweater based on dialogue later, which I thought was like a coat.
Mm-hmm.
It's red. Of course, Augusta can't see that.
I assume it's made of some sort of very fine fabric.
Mm-hmm. She's very pleased with it. I'm sure she thinks it came from Jack Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Frank Armstead shows up with flowers for Augusta and says, "Oh, I've been thinking about how, you've been talking about your pending divorce." And then Lionel is dismayed to realize that Frank might actually be interested in Augusta.
Yeah.
And so while Augusta invites Frank to come and have a chat, Lionel gets out his notepad and tries to steer Frank really away from the direction he's trying to go with Augusta about her divorce. And Augusta is bad-mouthing Lionel to him. And eventually Lionel writes something that Frank reads. It says, "Oh, I have to get home. I have to get to the house and work on some old astronaut papers." Which he then has to cover for. And say, it's just paperwork about some old astronaut things. So Augusta buys it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of hilarious. Next thing we know, Julia and Lionel walk into a restaurant, which a summary online that I was reading says was the Orient Express, but I'm not sure. It just seemed too dark and there was no dance floor, unless there's another section of the restaurant. But I just thought it was a Chinese restaurant.
I thought it was the Orient Express because it had all of the ornate sort of decorations that I noticed at the party.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll see that ornate pillar thing every time then, and
I'm
it'll
assuming
be very
so.
obvious.
Yeah.
Julia says, "I don't know if this is such a good idea, going out with my blind sister's husband." And then she spots Jack Stanfield Lee eating by himself. And he doesn't recognize her, but it's clear that she knows him very well. And she assumes he's pretending not to know her. So whatever happened last time they met, it's not entirely out of character for Jack to be a jerk to her. But of course he has no idea what the exact relationship is, so he covered by saying, "Oh, the lighting is really poor in here," and I guess Julia's thinking that would not explain why he wouldn't recognize her, so she ends up throwing his water in his face, and his bodyguards end up almost grabbing Julia, and Lionel calls her name, which is useful to Jack, because now he knows that her name is Julia, and Julia shouts, "Jack and I go a long way back. You may be advisor to the president, but you are still the same old scumbag, you creep." And then Lionel says to her, "You sure have powerful enemies."
This goes some way to explain Julia's rather cool reaction to Augusta bringing up Jack Stanfield Lee all the time.
After lunch, Jack is on the phone with someone. He says, "I have got to know who this woman is. It wasn't in any of the jackets. Her first name's Julia. This one woman could blow everything for us."
So looking more and more like we're dealing with a doppelganger.
And then we discover that the man he is talking to is torturing the real Jack Stanfield Lee.
I called it.
He's shirtless with his arms chained to the ceiling of what looks like a cave. And so I'm going to be calling that man the Torturer from now on if we don't get another name for him. And he shouts, "Who is Julia? Who is Julia?" And it looks like Jack Stanfield Lee is not going to talk, because I'll bet he realizes his best hope is for Julia to figure out that they have a doppelganger of him in Santa Barbara. So I think Julia's going to be the one who figures it out.
She's going to be pivotal.
Can't rely on Kelly Capwell to solve these things.
No. It will be nice if Julia figures out the connection with Amy's baby, too, because that's still a very odd thing.
Yeah, well, has Brick met Julia? They left town just around the time Julia came in, so they haven't had a chance to have a real good conversation about, Dr. Renfro or anything like that.
But that, when they do re-enter the story, that's a really great entry point for that story to be explained and solved. because Brick is with Amy.
And they know
Brick
the
works
phrase
for
New
the
S, New
Oxbridges.
Stalen, was on
Yep.
that sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone knows Jack was in New Stalen. And
Yep.
that could cause a conversation anyway.
Yeah. However, I think this does definitely back up the point we made many episodes ago that if Cece is relying on this particular version of Jack Stanfield Lee to win his court case, he's probably backing a losing horse.
Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe the doppelganger is a lawyer, but doesn't seem like it from the kind of personality he had when he wasn't pretending to be Jack.
Yeah.
And we'll see how long it takes for them to reveal his real name. I, of course, remember it now. I'm shocked, actually, that I didn't remember it when we first saw him, because it's actually quite a memorable name. So I will still continue to call him from now on the fake Jack Stanfield Lee until we get someone to say his name. Maybe Parker will now just say it next time now that the reveal has happened.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think the first time ever that the evil twin has been introduced on a show before the actual character's been introduced to the audience.
Yeah.
It's got to be a record. Marcello Armonti has a stopwatch, and he times exactly how long it takes him to walk from the middle of the Orient Express restaurant to elevator number 1. And he is taking notes. Then he gets into the elevator. So he is working out the exact timing of something.
Mm-hmm.
And in the basement, Marcello opens one of the wooden crates, and he extracts a very powerful and elaborate-looking machine gun. He says, "Mother and Father would understand what I'm doing and why." And then, of course, we hear a bit of, voiceover of his memories of things. And, of course, his parents were killed by a machine gun. Not really thanks to Cece, thanks to the Nazis, but, of course, he blames Cece for that.
Mm-hmm.
Later, Marcello is watching the monitor on the elevator, and Cruz and Eden are in the elevator. And Marcello actually now has audio in the elevator. He can hear them speaking. And Cruz says it's kind of nostalgic because he proposed to her in an elevator originally.
Mm-hmm.
And Eden says she's had a premonition that something terrible is going to happen. And, of course, Cruz tries to allay her fears, and he says, "Tomorrow we'll be husband and wife." And then Marcello says, "Tomorrow you are all going to experience a very major change in your plans and in the course of your lives. Tomorrow, May the 20th.
So Cruz is doing what he has been doing so well lately, which is batting aside anyone's concerns about things.
Mm-hmm. I wonder how we ever did solve that Russian ship thing
Mm-hmm. We never
off
heard.
screen.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they just took him off the case.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he says, my work is done because they said he's not going to solve that. We'll put someone else on it. And I think that's it for our summary. Anything you wanted to elaborate on the occurrences? Or?
Well, I'm assuming with the setup that he is constructing that perhaps someone will be in that elevator. Maybe the machine gun will be on a timer or something, and it'll take them to the basement. And perhaps the machine gun will open fire on them or something like that. That's sort of how I'm thinking of it, but I really don't know how that fits in with all of Marcello's plans, because he's got some dynamite in a briefcase and he's been scoping out the yacht, so I'm not quite sure what he has in mind.
Well, tomorrow is Friday, May the 17th, whose cliffhanger leads into Monday, May the 20th.
Mm-hmm.
So I am wondering if we will see exactly what Marcello has in mind by the end of this episode. I somehow think it will be the cliffhanger.
Someone getting in an elevator and being locked in and suddenly careening towards the basement, perhaps.
There is another component that we haven't seen yet, which I'm very excited about, and I feel like if Marcello does a dress rehearsal, that it definitely would be occurring in the Friday episode. So we may see his entire plan being run through by him as a test. I'm not quite sure, but I have a feeling that he does that. And from a writing standpoint, it makes sense to see, what the plan is from start to beginning so that we can have that tension of when it actually gets, put into practice, we'll know what's going to happen.
Or potentially happen.
What's supposed to happen. Yes. That's why in a Doctor Who they always show some random person being killed by the monster, so that later when the companion is threatened, you think, that's exactly what will happen to the companion.
Yeah.
So we'll be back after we watch episode 207 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
I really have to go. I have to get up to the house and work on some old astronaut papers.
Astronaut papers?
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've watched episode 207 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Friday, May 17th, 1985. We just watched a show where our heroes were in Santa Barbara, and they entered an elevator that took them deep into the earth against the will. It was called Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, starring Malcolm McDowell. Before that, we watched an episode of Dragnet, and the bad guy turned out to be Judy McConnell. This was aired early in 1970, and I guess would have been filmed just around the time that Sophia Capwell was presumed dead in the fictional world of Santa Barbara. So, kind of have an idea of what Sophia might have looked like back then, although I think she was wearing a red wig in this.
Yeah, she had a little orange mini dress on and sort of a back-combed, I guess it could be a red wig, or it might be highly hairsprayed hair, whichever. Very different than her Sophia look.
I think that's the oldest we've seen her in things. I know she was in... what show was she on? She was... her Green Acres appearances would have been earlier than that. But this is the only other thing other than Green Acres that I can remember seeing her.
Yeah, I guess this would have been about 10 years before we saw her in Another World.
Yes. Back in the show, Cruz and Eden are both having second thoughts about the wedding and trying to talk each other into being the one that backs out. At least that's how I interpreted that. They had some dialogue that was a little bit obscure and hard to read, I think, but the characters seemed to know what they were talking about. So, they discuss Eden changing her name at one point, and she says, Capwell Castillo, that sounds like a construction company. So they appear to call off the wedding, I think. Kind of low-key called it off. Next thing you know, we see Carmen cooking Cruz breakfast and say that she wouldn't want to marry him either. Nick shows up and realizes that he needs to make sure this wedding happens. So he tells Cruz it's a good thing the wedding's canceled because I lost the rings. Cruz says, well, you better find them by 1 o'clock. Carmen smiles. Sophia gives Eden some earrings that she was given on her wedding day by Cece's parents. And Nick goes over to the Capwell house and takes some photos of Sophia and Eden getting ready, which they don't notice at first. And then Eden freaks out when she sees them because she thinks it's another superstition that's going to cause her wedding to go horribly wrong.
And they do this in a really cute way. They show the series of Polaroids, and then, of course, Sophia and Eden's expression changing from shot to shot as they realize that Nick is filming them.
So Nick takes one of the photos to Cruz, and Cruz finds it quite disturbing. So he takes a selfie with the Polaroid camera, and Nick says, hey, I used to do that in college. So taking your own photograph was considered oddball behavior in 1985.
And they open a negotiation.
Yes, he writes on the bottom to Eden. He says, I won't leave you at the altar if you won't leave me. He gives that to Nick and says, make sure she signs that. At the Capwell Hotel, Eden's getting ready, and Nick gives her the photo. And she has some discussion over whether she wants to sign. She goes, I should sign it Eden X. She decides.
They're playing their own little game while everything else is going on.
Yeah. Marcello is now living in a guest room at the Capwell mansion, and he records a speech to Cece. Then, later at the hotel, Marcello sets up a monitor behind a tall plant on the 8th floor elevator lobby. I would say behind the plant is being generous, because literally anyone in that lobby at any position can see him standing there with a monitor behind the spindly plant. I don't know if it would have been, I don't know, maybe they just couldn't figure out logistically how they could hide Marcello around a little corner or something. I mean, I think even that corner where the switches were the other day, that was kind of around a corner. They could have showed that, but the problem was that throughout the day, Sophia's looking at Marcello, wondering what he's doing. So I guess if he were really hidden from view, she
wouldn't
do
have
that.
seen. Yeah.
Not that
yeah.
it really mattered, because she didn't manage to prevent anything. So.
No, but still, it wasn't really. We did actually, and I know you'll probably get into this, see a bit of a dress rehearsal for what he had planned, and I have to say, I was a little bit underwhelmed by it just because of this kind of thing. There isn't really a lot there that's necessarily hidden.
So Marcello sets up his monitor, and then he gets into the elevator and presses the remote control on his button to simulate what will happen. And sometime around the 7th floor, the pre-recorded speech starts to play. And actually I played it back in slow motion and compared it to the earlier one, and there are actually some slight adjustments to it. So presumably the actor read the second one, you know, while just in a recording booth, and the timing and cadence was slightly different, but who's to say Marcello didn't re-record it himself. So here's Marcello's speech. My name is Hans Ryker, and mine is the last voice that you will ever hear. You cannot leave and you cannot stop, Lieutenant Capwell. You are trapped in this small, unlikely place where your life will end. You will die. It will not be so painful nor so slow as the deaths my parents met on this day 41 years ago. Did you think of it this morning when you woke? The deaths you made me party and witness to? For to see a death is to belong to it, to carry it with you like a diagnosis, like a secret name. I'm seeing yours now, so you may join the company of dead I am already host to. Mother, father, children I never knew, bodies embracing in roadside graves, dogs, soldiers. They were my teachers and my studies both. I have become a great doctor because I learned that the mind is a force of nature. I can read its winds and storms like a meteorologist, and I know I can no more hold them back than I could stop the sun. But the sun stops for both of us today. I shall not hide, I shall not deny. I am not mad, Lieutenant Capwell. I am what you made me. And once the tie between us is broken, I can imagine no reason to continue as I am. Goodbye. Sounds like Marcello is planning to die along with Cece today. When the elevator gets to the basement, the door opens, the speech ends, and Marcello says, now, and we see the machine gun is now on a tripod, and it's on a swivel, and it cuts back and forth across the elevator as it fires. Of course, there are no bullets in it this time. We just hear a sound, and we see that surely Cece will die when that elevator door opens.
I feel like this is an amazing plan, and a really, actually great speech. But I wanted it in a James Bond set, not a clapboardy little elevator.
Well, I mean, the basement is certainly underwhelming.
Yeah.
Elevators are elevators, I guess. But
I wanted in one of those like stainless steel, circular glass elevators, you know, going down to the lair, and, you know, not Marcello hidden behind a ficus plant, but, you know, I think that's what it needs, because it's actually a pretty amazing plan.
So as the as Marcello's standing in the elevator, the machine gun going back and forth, he has a voiceover flashback to when his parents were killed. And knows he's doing the right thing. And then he actually dismantles everything so he can hide it, so it's not sitting there all day. So actually, he's got to unbolt the machine gun from the ground. It's actually probably a lot of labor to do that just so he can hide it in the office for a couple more hours.
Yeah, yeah.
CC has found Gina's pills in the credenza. He hands them to Rosa, who takes great glee in adding them to a huge bag of expired medicine that she's collected.
She's been all over the house and has confiscated her whole supply from the looks of it.
And she kind of looks at Gina when she says that she'll be doing regular sweeps of the medicine cabinets. So I don't know, does she suspect Gina's a drug addict? She's, she lives there, and Gina's always, sneaking pills. Maybe Rosa spotted something but hasn't, thought it was her place to say anything. Or maybe Brandon said something to her at one point.
Well, I think it is mentioned by one of the characters in this episode. I think it's Eden, actually, who says to Gina at one point, I used to think you were a good mother, but now you're just angry and mean all the time. And so I think something like that. I
think Santana said something similar to Gina too, but maybe that was...
Anyway, someone says that to her. And it just made me think that, we've noticed Gina's behavior changing. We certainly noticed her being very twitchy the last few episodes. So it wouldn't surprise me if Rosa has noticed this as well. And she's just putting two and two together. I mean, Gina's been like this since her accident when she tried to run over Hank. And, she definitely was under medication then. Apparently, the medication they're finding is the same as what Gina was prescribed. So
now, nowadays, you're supposed to take your expired medication back to the drugstore to be disposed of properly. But back in 1985, you just throw it in the trash can out back where Brandon could find it.
Yeah.
And in fact, that is where Gina finds it and retrieves her very expensive pills. Mason calls Gina and says he'll be in room 705 at the Capitol Hotel. So now the number of floors with rooms in it has definitely increased at the Capitol Hotel. It was the fifth floor was previously the presidential suite, which you assume is the top floor, and it previously was the top floor of the building, but now there's a few more floors. I strongly suspect those floors were added due to the length of Marcello's speech.
Yeah, it is actually, it's actually quite an impressive speech, but it is a very long speech for a fairly short ride down.
Well, presumably if Marcello can control the stopping and starting of the elevator, he could also control the speed of it once it reaches 7 and the voice triggers. So that's what I'm going to assume, because I assume when we see the real thing, it will take half an episode, and it's only a minute and a half. So you've got to assume that Marcello has control of the speed as well. So then Mason wonders to himself, should I tell her she's already pregnant afterward? Or ever? Santana shows up at Mason's place and wants the negatives. And Mason says, there are no negatives, all I have is these prints. And just then, Lindsay shows up, and that sort of solidifies in Santana's mind that Mason and Lindsay are working together. But Mason says, yeah, we're working on this case together. So Santana's convinced they faked the photos, and she shows them to Lindsay and says, how did you make these? And Lindsay is shocked that they even exist or are still around. And he says, well, this one, we were in the park, and there was this lady there taking photos and selling them. And then this one here, of course, was taken in the secret room, and Channing set the timer on the camera, because he said he really wanted this photo, and this was just so shortly before he died. I didn't realize how important it was. So Santana slaps him. She still thinks it's all fake. And then at one point in the conversation, he realizes that Brandon is Channing's son, and that Santana's the girl. He says, oh yeah, I knew there was a girl and a son, but I didn't know it was you. So they basically argue about which of them Channing truly loved. And Lindsay says, why do you have to one-up me on this? Why can't we'd both be people that Channing loved. So by the end of the conversation, they basically end up, Santana basically ends up thinking Mason's of the trio of men in this, Mason's the one that she needs to hate. She says, all these nasty things you've said about Channing, I think these all just came from inside you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually quite an interesting scene, and I thought it was well acted because Santana, as you say, goes from thinking that Lindsay has staged this to, you can see her face changing as Lindsay very movingly talks about the whole history behind each photo. And then they start kind of negotiating their relationship with Channing, that, I think she's starting to see that maybe it was real, but she still wants to feel that she was the most important person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think by the end of that, they come to realize that Channing meant a lot to both of them, and that perhaps they have a lot in common, even though obviously their interests weren't entirely aligned, but they both saw something in Channing that other people, such as Mason, never did see.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as you say, by the end of it, I think they come to a sort of understanding, and neither of them is really aligned at all with Mason.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was mentioned that Lindsay was getting married to a girl, and, well, I guess to a girl is implied in 1985, because you couldn't marry a man.
You wouldn't be able to, no.
So Santana finds it odd that he's marrying a girl if he's gay, and he says, well, if I'd met someone like Channing, I would be with him. So, but
I think the other thing that came out of this conversation, and I think both of them say it about themselves at one point, and Channing as well, is the fact that they were all young. They must have all been very young, and would all have perhaps made different decisions if they'd been a little bit older and stronger. That word comes up a lot. So Santana might have kept her baby. Lindsay might have actually not been as afraid to be a little more public or expect a little bit more from Channing in that relationship. And maybe Channing would have had the courage to step up for both of them a little bit more.
But I still doubt it would have been public in 1985. It's certainly not if Cece was planning for him to be the governor someday.
Well, that's the thing. It probably wouldn't have been public under those circumstances. But if Channing was indeed so unhappy as Lindsay's maintained with his relationship with his father, maybe he would have forgone that dream Cece had of him and built a life with Lindsay or with Santana, for that matter. Because neither of those relationships was going to jive with what Cece had planned for Channing.
Yeah, I think Santana's turnaround was kind of when Lindsay confirmed that Channing's, confided to him that he did love Santana.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
So later on, Gina arrives in room 705, and she's got a scarf around her head, because, she is, after all, married to the owner of the hotel. And she says, I bet someone recognized me in the lobby. And Mason says, as Greta Garbo, maybe. Why is it that all my father's wives run around in disguises?
That's a good
Why is it that all of my father's wives run around in disguises? So she takes off her dress right away and starts undressing Mason, because she's got a wedding to go to. But then Mason says, hang on, you got to sign these documents. And she takes the pen, she goes, I can't really trust you to live up to your end of the bargain, so sex first. And as much as Mason likes the sound of that, he says, well, I can't really trust you to sign the documents after we have sex. So they kind of end up at an impasse.
Now, what Gina perhaps doesn't realize at this point, we'll see, maybe it'll be interrupted and whatever, but she would actually be better off to just sign the thing, because then she actually wouldn't necessarily have to have sex with Mason if he decided to tell her, if he snatched away the document and then said, well, actually, you're already pregnant, so you don't have to sleep with me.
Don't think
You don't think he would do
Oh,
that?
I see. You're thinking... That's
Well, he
right,
wants
because he
the
just
document.
wants the document signed.
He wants the document.
Right. She doesn't know all that. So. She thinks he wants to have sex with her, just for fun. Primarily. This is a bonus.
But doesn't he say at one point, do I even need to have sex with her?
I don't remember, but maybe.
I mean, he doesn't really. If she signs the thing, he could find a reason not to. Or to...
Yeah, because she's already pregnant, so...
Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't
And it could be Hank's baby. That's the other thing.
Well, that's the other thing.
No one's even talked about. Well, Gina wouldn't think about it, so...
Yeah.
Back at the Capwell mansion, Ted's big scene. He's tying some tin cans together. And he's doing something with some shoes that he lies to Rosa about, but Kelly giggles at whatever he's doing. Santana visits Brandon at the hospital, and then about an hour and a half later, Gina shows up, and she's kind of annoyed that Santana's there. She says, "Oh, that was for last night only. How long have you been here?" Hour and a half. No. And then she tells the nurse that this woman is banned from seeing my son. Marcello has put on his tuxedo, and he watches as he's ordering people to set up chairs, and he wonders to himself how Kelly will feel when Cece's dead. And then he goes to the basement and installs the machine gun into its final position, and says, "The choice is no longer mine." And he's talking to his parents, of course, and he loads up the bullets this time. Sophia sees Marcello waiting behind his plant, looking at his monitor, and has a worried look on her face. And she gives him a weird look, too, at one point when he walks by. Inside, Carmen drags Cece around to meet guests who want to meet the parents of the bride and groom. Sophia sees Marcello give a bellboy a note that the bellboy brings to Cece. This reminds me of the note in the first episode that Channing was given to come to the study.
That's right. That's a good catch.
When Cece reads it, he excuses himself and says he has to attend to an emergency. I think he says in the lobby, actually, but maybe I just added that in my own head. So Cece actually comes past Sophia as he gets to the elevators, because she's hanging around in that lobby, kind of watching Marcello, but not really, confronting him about his weird ficus obsession. But Cece is about to head towards elevator 2, I guess, or call it, but Marcello presses the button, causing elevator 1's door to open right away, and Cece goes into it. And then Marcello presses the button to close the elevator door and seal Cece's doom. Oh, but that's not the cliffhanger for the episode, because at the last second, Kelly comes running in and goes into the elevator with Cece. The doors close and Marcello shouts, "Kelly, you're both going to die!" And that is the cliffhanger for a Friday episode.
Now, throughout the last bit of this episode, Kelly says to Sophia at one point, "Oh, there's something I have to talk to you about." And then that's why she runs out.
Oh,
was it? I thought she said it to Sophia as
maybe.
well. But and then anyway, maybe it was Cece. But then that's why she runs out after Cece, because there's something she wants to tell him. And so I'm going to be really curious if we ever find out what it is she's so desperate to tell him, because I'm sure that Marcello's tape is going to kick in as soon as the elevator starts going down.
Was there a conversation where Kelly said to Sophia, I talked to Cece and he said it's okay if you're in the wedding party or something? Or
I can't remember. But I know she's very desperate to talk to Cece. Obviously, that's why she got on. And I wasn't quite clear what it was she needed to talk to him about.
So now, of course, we flash back to a few weeks ago when Marcello said to Eden, "If there were, nothing would stand in my way." And suddenly Kelly Capwell, who I think Marcello really likes and cares for, is standing in the way of his revenge on Cece. So what do you think will happen?
Well, I think Marcello might try to stop it somehow. The problem Marcello has is that because he had to record that James Bond movie style audio tape, he is implicated. He can't say, "Oh my goodness, I saw someone skulking around in the basement." Or I saw someone. Like, he can't pass it off.
This is it for him. Like,
yeah, he is.
That tape plays Kelly and
he's
Cece.
revealed. Yeah.
Although he does not hypnotize people.
That is true. That is true.
Assuming they survive multiple machine gun bullets.
Yeah, so he could try and stop it, or he could let them go down, and maybe they're rescued by CC's amazing military skills somehow.
Nick Hartley leaps down the elevator shaft.
Maybe CC pulls them out on top of the elevator just in time or something like that. He doesn't look that agile to me, but it's possible.
Recast into an agile CC. That would be amazing to do a recast right in the middle of a cliffhanger.
So I think that's the only way it can go. Either Marcello stops it.
I wonder if Marcello planned for the possibility of having to stop it. Because really, once the tape starts, he couldn't imagine there being any reason to stop it. Right?
Yeah. I don't think anyone else could stop it. I mean, Cruz isn't there yet, because he and Eden are still doing this negotiation, which no one else knows about. All through the party, everyone's wondering where Cruz is, and of course he's still waiting for Eden to.
Well, I think that because Marcello said you're both going to die, that once it started down, there's no way for him to stop it.
Yeah.
Because we only ever saw him do two things to it: bring it up to the top and send it down to the bottom with his remote.
Now, I'm sure Sophia seeing him skulking there with his little remote control might draw attention to him. I mean, that might be one thing, if someone can wrench that remote control out of his hand, and I don't know if it's got a stop button on it or anything.
Well, we will find out after we go for a long walk.
It's walk day.
It's walk day in the real world. But tonight on Dallas, season 8 finale, I hear a rumor that Pam and Bobby decide to get remarried. And it looks like their old friend Catherine Wentworth is going to come back to town to help them celebrate in an episode titled Swan Song. Ooh, it sounds pretty.
I have a question for you, actually, being a soap opera person. When was the whole Luke and Laura storyline? When would that wedding have taken place? Because I remember
that was in the 80s.
Hearing a lot about that
this time. I'll do some research, Luke and Laura, but I would say it was probably early 80s. If I had to guess, I would say 83.
Oh, so maybe a little bit before this.
That's what I'll guess, and we'll see how close I come.
Yeah, I was just curious because you were talking about all these weddings taking place during sweeps, and I was thinking, I wonder if that Luke and Laura one was around that time.
Yeah, I mean, if we looked at the other 16 soaps or whatever, we would probably see a number of other weddings in May happening this very May. So, but I don't think there are as many soaps that are as thoroughly documented going back to 1985 as Santa Barbara is. I mean, we have that wonderful Santa Barbara online site that has smaller episode summaries for every episode, which we looked at for that one that was half in French and found that we basically got the gist of everything. But I'm writing these much longer synopses that we'll put up online once we get our act together, and maybe someday that will be useful to people who are doing research. I mean, there was a question on one of the Facebook groups last week saying, which episode was it where there was a reporter who called himself Clark Griswold. And thanks to my notes, I just searched for Griswold, and I found the episode in a second. And in fact, we had a second one this week, so I should do a follow-up post. So. Well,
you're a database expert in real life. Maybe you better get moving with a searchable database for everyone.
Well, that's true. Yeah, there's the checkbox for spoiler-free and full spoilers. Who is this guy that's playing Jack Stanfield Lee? So we'll be back after we watch an episode of Dallas and have a whole long weekend and then watch the the Monday episode of Santa Barbara, the Monday, May the 20th, 1985 episode. The greatest episode of television ever.
Do we have the episode in English?
Well, we'll see when we press play.
Maybe.
Maybe I can find it in German
Maybe.
and I can translate it. We will see you for week 43 of Santa Barbara.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
My name is Hans Ryker, and mine is the last voice that you will ever hear.